yourself. I'm not sure why, because the settings should be able to give you that access. So this morning session, where it would have started with just a briefing, I'm going to instead start with study unit 0, and then we will work through study unit 0, and we will then work through study unit 1. I just need to get the right view for the presentation quickly. Okay, I'm assuming that you can see the first slide, which reads Section 0, Foundational Understanding of Policing and Social Order in Pre-Colonial Africa. Awesome. So this is where I'm going to start, and I'm assuming that that is all you can see. So before we get into the actual lesson, I see we've been joined by Felicia. Welcome, Felicia. It is important that we consider these concepts because what we're going to discuss in the next couple of slides has an impact not only on life in general, but also how we address and approach our investigations. So study unit 0 touches briefly on philosophy, criminal justice in pre-colonial Africa, decolonization of our curriculum, the issues of social justice, equity, equality, and justice, alternative dispute resolution, restorative justice, and then the philosophy of Ubuntu. So in terms of philosophy, we must never assume that we understand how another person thinks and therefore how the other person will act. What is important is that we first of all take a moment to consider what is our philosophical position. What I mean by this, philosophy is the study of problems in general. It comes from the Greek word philosophia, and it means the love of wisdom. Why are we considering this? Well, each of us needs to be aware of the philosophical stance we hold because it's either grounded in a Eurocentric way of thinking or an Afrocentric way of thinking. These are our default settings. So we don't always have to, when we're in a situation, think how we're going to react. Our reaction is there, and it comes and it's grounded from this. Where is our philosophical thinking grounded? We must be aware of the differing views out there so that we can be sure that we do not exclude some views in favor of others, or that we don't argue that one is better to hold over others. One philosophical view or one stance, like an Afrocentric or Eurocentric, should never be seen as superior. There are good views in both, and one should always try for a combination. Let's pause a moment and ask ourselves, was Africa a lawless place before the white man arrived? Did justice exist in Africa before the white man arrived? And yes, it did. The white man did not bring justice to South Africa, to Africa. He merely brought his version or their version of justice to Africa. African justice is not the same as a Eurocentric or a European or a Western type of justice. If you go and read the links I've placed in the study guide, in the reference list, you will soon realize that African justice is a lot more compassionate and a reconciliatory justice because it's founded on the concept of community. Whereas Western justice is harsh and it's punitive because it goes about the individual in the situation. Social justice is a concept that we will consider right through the study guide. Social justice comprises of 5 different principles: human rights, access to resources, equity, participation, and diversity. The former public protector advocate Thuli Madonsela argued that in the South African context, social justice is about just and fair access, as well as equitable distribution of opportunities, resources, privileges, and burden. And as I said, in the module, we will really consider these 5 principles and ask ourselves all the time where and how we can apply these principles in our investigations and sometimes even in our personal lives. Now, you might think this is odd or challenging at first, but I believe that with practice and collaborative feedback, when we chat with each other, we will be able to not only share our thoughts and ideas, but also learn from one another. And I want you to feel free to share these principles with your colleagues and your friends, your families, and even the elders in your communities, and ask them what are their views on these concepts. The next aspect we will also reflect on right through the study guide is equity. Now, equity are tools that are custom built to identify and address any inequality. We will consider equality as a concept. Equality is about the even distribution of tools and assistance so that everybody has equal access. And then justice. Justice is about fixing the system so that the system considers and gives meaning to both equity and equality. And once again, we will be looking at to what extent these concepts are brought to fruition in our work. Then something that you may have heard of, alternative dispute resolution. This is a mechanism to resolve disputes in an alternative manner, and it is an accepted mechanism in the South African legal context. We will consider throughout the semester how conflicts in the workplace, because workplace discipline results in conflict, how this can be addressed through alternative dispute resolution. And what you see there, the person on the left sees a 9, while the person on the right sees a 6. They are in conflict. Both have a view. And in this position, if the person on the right doesn't go to the person on the left, he will not be able to see that person's view. The person on the left, if he doesn't go to the person on the right, he will not see that person's view. So sometimes we must literally try and walk a mile in another person's shoes before we can see the 9 on the left or the 6 on the right. And then something that's also accepted in our criminal justice system is the concept or the practice or process of restorative justice. Restorative justice is aimed at restoring what was lost, broken, and or hurt. I don't know if any of you have ever been exposed to restorative justice. I was exposed to it a couple of years ago when my son was assaulted at primary school. And the young boy that assaulted him was a pre-teenager, but he was in conflict with the law. So instead of arresting and taking him to juvenile court, we went through a system of restorative justice. But it's a process, and the parties must agree to it. Similarly, in a workplace environment, there should be space for something like this. And then the last concept we will consider right through the class and through the semester is that of Ubuntu. Now, from a Western perspective, I don't think that that from a Western ideology, we can understand and fully appreciate the weightiness of what Ubuntu, the concept, because not just a concept, Desmond Tutu said it speaks of the essence of being human. So I think whereas in the Western concept, we have the saying, do unto others what you want them to do unto you. I don't think that really captures the essence and the spirit of Ubuntu and what is intended in Ubuntu, but we will definitely consider these as we go through. So that is basically study unit 0. Study unit 0, the concepts that we've done here is to be used as a lens when we go through the content in the semester. So I want to prepare for us quickly study unit 1, and I see we are Felicia and Diebold. We are just still the two of us. So I'm going to try and call up our next class, which will be the study unit 1. What's important with this study unit is that it helps us to understand. Sorry, I just need to get to the right slide. It's a new system, and I'm still finding my feet. Okay, so in this class, we first look at the rules of the class, and I call it housekeeping. So what are the rules? The rules are be present. We must be sure that our microphones are off. If you want to ask something, you raise your hand, and once you're done, you take it down, and we do it by raising our hands like that, and once we're done, we take it down. We will be respectful. We will use the chat box and type questions in the chat box. And if you do write something in the chat box, please don't write in capital letters. It makes the person reading it feel that you're shouting at them. I will be using images in my presentations. The images I use are from Pixabay, and they're all copyright free. And then in the instances where I make use of Pinterest, I love Pinterest, I will give due reference. So it helps that we have some of these rules, and it ensures the time we spend together online with each other is meaningful and productive, and to ensure that everybody is welcome, included, and respected, and feels welcome, included, and respected. So I just want us to again remind ourselves about what this module FOR1502, selected crimes and transgressions. Now, what is it about? This module is not intended to prepare you or to equip you to work as a forensic laboratory assistant. You will not be able to work in a laboratory and analyze DNA and the like. It is designed to give you a foundational set of skills for investigative work in the corporate, private, and public service space. This may mean that you could work in a policing environment or at a parastatal like ESCOM or SARS, or you could even start your own investigative company and be a private investigator. Be reminded that this is foundational. Once you're done with this module, you will not yet be able to do all the things that are required. You will require on-the-job training, coaching, or mentoring. So the outcomes of this specific module, we call these outcomes also objectives. Now, objectives can be seen as stepping stones that guide you in your progress. If you don't know where you are going, how will you know when you get there? For this reason, in the study guide, there are study unit outcomes, and this is what we should be able to do or be more familiar with once we've gone through the lesson. This is also what Stephen Covey refers to in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind. So what should we be able to do or be more familiar with at the end? Should be able to distinguish between very serious misconduct, and misconduct. We should be able to explain the difference between a disciplinary transgression and a criminal offense. We should be able to identify and define the different terms and concepts that will be used in this space. And we should be able to explain the link between company policy and the Labor Relations Act. Society is governed by rules and laws. If you don't know what the rules are, how can you follow them? Therefore, it's vital that you first know the rules before you can follow the rules. You will recall 2 slides back, we looked at housekeeping. So if I want us all to follow the rules in this online space, then I must make the rules known to everybody. I cannot call you out for something that is, number one, not contained in the rules or that I haven't told you about. Having said that, it's impossible to have rules and laws for each and every situation in life. For this reason, we have laws, we have common laws, we have statutory laws, and we have codes of conduct, we have rules, and we have policies. These documents help us to color inside the lines, as it were. There are rules and there are laws. Rules are more informal. Colleagues, just a quick. My apologies, and I am back. So it's vital that you first know the rules before you can follow the rules. Now, I have to distinguish between rules and laws. Rules are more informal, but there are also consequences when they are broken. I have a friend that says never make a rule that you don't intend to enforce. That rule becomes useless if you don't enforce it. You can be charged under a disciplinary code of your company if you do not abide by the rules of the company. But those rules will only apply to the employees of the company. It may not apply to a Mr. Delivery person that comes into the premises or a person that's just coming to visit or collect something. And it's important to realize that non-compliance with policy of a company, the rules of that, will only amount or may only amount to a disciplinary transgression. For example, coming to work late, not dressing in the correct way that you should. Those are rules, but sometimes policy and the rules in policy, if you transgress them, it may also amount to a crime. Non-compliance with law is a criminal offense. Laws are that which is contained in either the common law or statutory law. Breaking the law has dire consequences, and you will get into trouble. In the previous slide, I used the term to color inside the lines. This basically means that you stay within the boundaries set by the law or the rules. So from the image on the left, you can see the different shades of yellow, pink, and green, and blue in the top image. Now, But in the image below, the lines have blurred, and one is not really sure where the one color starts and the other color ends. Now, in an investigative environment, blurred lines are never good. Now, how does this relate to our lesson? Well, since society is governed by rules and laws, it means that as members of society, all of us, are expected to conduct ourselves in a specific way. Government is in place. They have put laws in place that tell us what conduct is acceptable and what's not acceptable. In this module, specifically the second section, we will use laws originating from our common law and statutory law. It's important to know that the South African labour environment is framed in the Labour Relations Act. That's a statutory law set in place by government to set the boundaries for how labour relations, or the relationships between the worker and the boss, or the employer and the employee, is to be managed and navigated. You may notice the legislation was promulgated shortly after our first democratic elections, 1995. For me, this is important because it implies that whatever was before this was not sufficient and it needed to be replaced. Company policy must be aligned with the legislation of a country. The company policy may never differ in terms of the law. It may, for example, if the Labour Relations Act says that the company must give you 30 days vacation leave in a 12-month cycle, let's say, and it runs from January to December, the company policy may give you 30 days, may give you 35 days, but the company may not give you 15 days. So they may be more lenient, but they may not be stricter. If legislation says that employment equity is law, and there's a law like that, the Employment Equity Act, then companies must adhere to this in their appointments and promotions policy. So Schedule 8 also of the Labour Relations Act stipulates that companies must have a disciplinary code that sets out the disciplinary rules in the company. If colleagues do not conform to these rules, there are consequences. In this space, we refer to such disobedience to the rules as misconduct. So disobedience in the work environment is called misconduct. Why do we need discipline in the workplace? Well, unfortunately, society has shown that not all people can or even want to comply with the rules. Disciplinary guidelines creates a safe space for all of us. We know what to do. We know what time must we start working. We know what is supposed to be doing when we're at work. We have a job description. As an academic, I know what modules I'm responsible for. I know what level these modules are. I know when may I stop working in the afternoon, because no employer can expect of their employee to work beyond the maximum of 40 hours a week. If we do go over that time, then overtime comes into play. So, but what happens if I'm unable to perform? If my performance is poor and I'm unable to perform at the level that the company is expecting of me? This is called then poor performance. If a soccer player is unable to play a full game, the full game time, they aren't fired or disciplined. No, they're usually benched and they are given time to get back into form. Now, this often happens after, let's say, an illness or an injury. We've just come through COVID. COVID took a heavy toll on society globally. And in many spaces, a lot of people were simply unable to perform at the level that they were pre-COVID. So I think this has put a lot of new challenges at the door of the employer, because now he's sitting with a person or persons who were before the time able to function at X level, and now that person is unable to, through no fault of their own, through an illness, to perform at that level. Misconduct is not a specific offense. We talked about disobedience is called misconduct. Misconduct is not a specific type of offense. It's the term we use in the labor relations environment to frame the type of conduct being referred to. In other words, conduct that has missed the mark. Misconduct, missed the mark of conduct that the person is supposed to adhere to. Now, the disciplinary policy of your company or organization must set out clearly what is to happen when somebody allegedly transgresses a rule or several rules. Remember, I'm saying now allegedly, because in South Africa, we follow the principle of innocent until proven guilty. So even if there's evidence, even if there's surveillance evidence, if it hasn't served before a tribunal, it is untested, and whatever the person did is still an allegation. Now, in some companies, if misconduct is a criminal offense, so let's say in my company, you are not allowed to take company property that does not belong to you. It's called misappropriation of company property or use of company property without permission. Now, that is a disciplinary type of offense. It's misconduct, but it is also a criminal offense. It is theft. So in some companies, the policy might stipulate that if the misconduct is also a criminal offense, then immediately the South African Police Service must be brought into the picture. A case must be opened, and the matter must be handed over to the authorities. When I was a police official and somebody broke the law, whatever they did, we had the rule that the disciplinary investigation would run concurrently with the criminal investigation, because sometimes out of the disciplinary investigation, the person would be fired. They would lose their job, especially if there was an element of dishonesty involved. But that will depend on your company policy. If your company policy does not have this in, perhaps it should be incorporated. In other companies, the policy may indicate that the internal investigator first complete a comprehensive investigation. When all the evidence is collected, then an entire investigative file is handed to the police and a criminal charge is made against the alleged perpetrator. So I'm going to ask again, if you are working, do you know what is contained in your policy? Okay, levels of misconduct. There's various levels of misconduct. And each disciplinary policy must stipulate what is considered as very serious misconduct, serious misconduct, and less serious misconduct. Now, we have in your study guides, we've given you some examples of these 3 levels of misconduct. But these are examples, and it's important that you go and determine from your policy, the policy in your working environment, what does your employer consider as very serious misconduct? For example, the use of liquor or narcotic drugs while being on duty or being drunk on duty, that is considered a very serious misconduct in terms of where the study guide is. Workplace misconduct is only punishable within the space of that specific organization or company. For example, if you work at UNISA, we have a specific disciplinary policy that applies to staff at UNISA. But if I were to resign and I go work at, let's say, the University of Johannesburg, I cannot take the disciplinary policy of UNISA with me. No, I need to be informed. I need to be informed what the University of Johannesburg's disciplinary policy says. In other words, when I arrive there, it's usually called an induction or onboarding, in which I am told, welcome, we're very happy to have you here. Here are our rules. So in other words, if you want to feel safe in this environment, these are the rules we've put. This is the policy on the use of your computer. This is the policy on the use of your phone. This is a policy on disciplinary misconduct, so that I know what are the rules that are in place. And I can be sure that I can attend to those rules and make sure I do not transgress. Disciplinary misconduct, like repeatedly coming to work late or leaving your workstation for extended periods without permission, is not a criminal offense. The police will not get involved. But if, for example, there's a person that, let's say, harasses a person or a group of persons at work, or steals company property, that is also a criminal offense. So while it's spelled out in the disciplinary policy, these types of misconduct are also criminal offenses, and the police should get involved. But let's pause there. The Labour Relations Act also makes it clear that one does not have to investigate disciplinary misconduct for every type of misconduct. And therefore, it's important to know what is very serious, what is serious, and what is less serious. So efforts should be made, and I'm reading now from paragraph 3.2 of Schedule 8 of the Labour Relations Act. Effort should be made to correct the employee's behavior through a system of graduated disciplinary steps, such as counseling and warning. Formal procedures do not have to be invoked every time a rule is broken or a standard is not met. Informal advice and correction is the best and most cost-effective way for an employer to deal with minor violations of work discipline. Time is money. It costs money for you as an internal investigator to investigate an allegation. If the allegation is less serious, more often than not, the HR or the line manager will get to make the call to say, okay, so this type of misconduct is perhaps less serious, and let's say failure to report a sickness to an employer, it might be considered as less serious. So we will take the person through corrective counseling, and we will not have an investigation which costs money. And at the end of the day, to say, you know what, it was ignorance, or it was an error, or whatever the case might be. So be sure that your company policy also stipulates absolutely when an investigation must be held. Because before you go to a disciplinary trial, before that decision is made, an investigation must be done. It's never your work as the investigator to charge a person. Never, never. You do the investigation and you submit the report to your line manager or to the head of internal investigations. That process, also contained in policy, has to be spelled out. How a decision is then made to either just issue a verbal warning or a written warning, or to say, no, we have to go over into a full-fledged disciplinary trial. So it's very important that you are aware of that. You see, I've had the image there of oops. Oops means, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. And this is important for us to take a note of. If you make a mistake once, it is a mistake. Making that same mistake a second time is a decision. And I got this from Pinterest. Anyone who's never made a mistake simply does not live. We all make mistakes, but we must learn from them. How does one show that you've learned from a mistake that you have made? Simply by not repeating that same mistake. So this is also important in a labor environment. If we use the processes of alternative dispute resolution or restorative justice, if a person has failed to carry out a reasonable or legal instruction within the time required, for example, which is considered as a less serious offense, through alternative dispute resolution, you will remember the person on the left saw a 6 and the person on the right saw a 9. We can talk, have a conversation, and find common ground in terms of what the alleged transgressor did that was not in complying with company policy, so that the alleged transgressor is more informed or better informed or has a better understanding of what is required by company policy. We don't always necessarily agree with company policy, but that doesn't give us the right to disobey company policy. Unless company policy is absolutely, let's say, not aligned with labor law or the constitution even, then that company policy should be challenged. So before an investigation can be conducted in a workplace, there must be an incident. So something must have happened. Somebody came late for work repeatedly. Somebody used violence against another person. Somebody left the premises without authorization, just not to be seen or heard from again. So something must have happened. Then there must be a formal complaint. This usually comes from the line manager if it's a subordinate that did something wrong, or from a victim if it's something like harassment or racism or something like that. So there has to be a formal complaint. This is when person A reports that person B did X, Y, and Z wrong. The nature of this complaint must be contained in the disciplinary code. If it's not there, it is not misconduct. So, for example, if I come to work on a Monday morning wearing a blue shirt, blue denims, and blue shoes, and my co-worker feels that I am not standing in solidarity with the team supporting the red side of life, he can lay a complaint against me, or she can lay a complaint against me. But if dressing in blue on a Monday morning is not considered disciplinary misconduct, frankly, they cannot do anything. You will remember that I said one cannot possibly make provision for any types of and every type of misdeed. And therefore, it's important that our policies and our rules are framed in such a way that they are clear and that there is also no room for misinterpretation. So the disciplinary unit or the forensic investigation component or internal investigations, whatever they are called, will have to determine the level of seriousness at the hand of the policy. Not all misconduct needs to be formally investigated. In some instances, the misconduct can be dealt with between the line manager and the alleged transgressor and remedial action instituted. Sometimes if a colleague feels harassed by another colleague, it might be absolute ignorance that this person doesn't know that what they are repeatedly saying is offensive. And then one has to you ask them to stop, and they think, oh yeah, you're not really serious, because no doesn't always mean no. And then the complainant goes and lays a charge, and there's a formal complaint, and then the line manager can realize, but you know what, after investigating, or after a preliminary investigation, this person really is ignorant. And then we can go a restorative justice process, or a alternative dispute resolution process. Company policy must be clear on this. Understanding what the allegation is before commencing the investigation is vital, because you must know what it is that you are investigating. Number one, what is the allegation? What is being alleged? Then you must know who is the person, who is the alleged perpetrator. If you, as the forensic investigator, are closely associated with that person, a wife, an ex-wife, an ex-partner, family member, a friend, then it is wiser to ask that you be removed from the investigation and someone else be tasked. Even if you think, no, I can be objective, I can be truly objective. Rather leave that decision in the hands of line management. If you have told line management there might be a conflict of interest, the person I'm investigating is an old school friend of mine, but we don't have contact anymore. We do call each other once a year on our birthdays, but we're not friends. We're acquaintances. We say hello and goodbye at work, but that is it. Then your line manager can make the decision to say, you know what, you've been transparent, and we feel that there is sufficient space, and we are satisfied that you will be objective, or thank you for telling us, we will remove you from the investigation. You then need to gather evidence to prove the allegation, and this evidence will be weighed. We're going to address in study unit 2, when we discuss the standard and of evidence and the burden of proof, we're going to discuss that. Because the integrity of the evidence has to be protected, so that when you present it in whatever tribunal it may result in, sometimes it goes to a disciplinary case, sometimes you even end up at the CCMA or in a criminal trial. So you must make sure that whatever you do within the framework of what is permitted by law, the Criminal Procedure Act. Criminal Procedure Act unpacks what may you do, when may you do, and how may you do. And then at the end of the day, you are going to be drafting an investigative report. We'll also discuss that, I think, in study unit 2, in which we will look at what goes into such a report and how should one formulate such a report. What about off-site misconduct? What about if I am dressed in a UNISA t-shirt, or I have a UNISA jacket on, and I sit at a pub or at a restaurant, and I am rude or make derogatory remarks about women in a restaurant while I'm dressed in a UNISA shirt? Does my company's policy make provision for this? Do they say that if I am out of my workspace, out of office hours, I can be held accountable for misconduct if I can be associated with UNISA? I travel between the office and home with a UNISA branded vehicle. I speed. What about that? Breaking the law, yes. But UNISA cannot charge me for breaking the speed limit. But what about the reputation of the company? Or if I'm active on Twitter and I make all sorts of statements about my organization or even the government, which everyone is entitled to their opinion. But if I put my opinion out there as an employee of UNISA, to what extent might UNISA's reputation not pick up damage? So what does the company policy say about that? My social media presence. What should I post on social media? And that's why it's important. I see a lot of the people also on Twitter. I have a Twitter handle. Not incredibly active on Twitter, but I do say in my Twitter handle that my views are my own and not my employer's views. But I also then make great effort to ensure that whatever I post is respectful, is inclusive, and cannot put my company UNISA in a bad light. You will also not see from my profile that I work for UNISA. If through some of my postings you make the assumption, but I do not say, hello, I am a UNISA employee. So that's another question to ask. Okay, let's go back to where we started to see where it is that we wanted to end. From the study guide, will you be able to distinguish between very serious misconduct, or just misconduct, less serious misconduct? Would you be able to explain the difference between a disciplinary transgression and a criminal offense? Would you be able to identify and define different terms and concepts that are relevant to the disciplinary space? For example, misconduct. For example, what was the other one that we used? Codes of conduct, rules, laws, poor performance. Are you more familiar with those terms? And then, do you understand the link between the Labor Relations Act and company policy? Now I want to ask whether there are any questions. I'm uncertain whether you will be able to unmute your mics. I have set the settings that mics are allowed for attendees. So you should be able to unmute your mic. If you are unable to, please feel free to just in the chat box write any questions that you have. Any questions, Deerwold or Felicia? Okay, Deerwold doesn't have any questions at the moment. Felicia, do you have any questions at the moment? Okay, no questions at the moment. Okay, thanks, Felicia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop presenting. I am going to stop this PowerPoint so that I can load the other one. I'm hoping I will be able to load the other one, because the other one speaks to basically the briefing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also end the recording